My mother-in-law sold my house while I was on my honeymoon. I returned from my dream honeymoon to find my life erased, my home sold out from under me, and the mastermind was the one person I was supposed to trust most, my husband's mother. My name is Isabella, and I was 28 years old when my world fractured into a million unrecognizable pieces. It began, as these stories often do, with a perfect moment. The 2 weeks in the Maldives had been a blur of turquoise water, powdery white sand, and the kind of blissful, uninterrupted joy that feels like a stolen secret. My new husband, Liam, and I had spent our days exploring coral reefs and our nights tangled in crisp hotel sheets, whispering about the future we were so eager to build. We were newlyweds, giddy with the promise of it all, and at the center of that promise was the house. The charming little craftsman bungalow with the big oak tree in the yard, the one we had poured all our savings into, the one we had spent months painting and furnishing just before the wedding. It was more than just wood and nails. It was the physical embodiment of our new life together. The plane ride home was filled with that same buoyant energy. We held hands across the armrest, our minds already there, picturing the familiar turn onto our street, the welcome of our own front door. We were tired, sun-kissed, and ready to trade the fantasy of a resort for the reality of our home. But as the Uber turned the corner onto our block, a strange sense of unease began to prickle at the edges of my happiness. Something was off. The light seemed different, the air heavier. Then I saw it. A stark red and white "For Sale" sign planted squarely in the middle of our front lawn. My heart gave a painful lurch. I turned to Liam, my confusion mirrored on his face. He chuckled nervously, probably assuming it was some kind of elaborate, terrible prank by one of our friends. But as the car pulled closer, the sign became undeniably real. Then I saw the lockbox on the doorknob, glinting mockingly in the afternoon sun. This was no joke. A cold dread, thick and suffocating, began to creep up my throat. I fumbled for my keys, my hands suddenly clumsy and numb. The keychain with the little silver home charm Liam had bought me felt like a lead weight. I pushed past Liam, my feet moving on their own accord, up the familiar stone path to the porch. I tried my key in the lock. It didn't work. Of course it didn't work. I peered through the glass panel on the door, and the breath hitched in my lungs. The inside of our house was empty. Not just we're minimalistic empty, but stripped bare, hollowed out empty. The pale blue walls we had so carefully chosen were still there, but the sofa, the coffee table, the vintage rug, the television, everything was gone. The rooms echoed with a vast, cavernous silence. My mind raced, trying to catch up, trying to make sense of the impossible scene in front of me. Had we been robbed? But a robbery wouldn't explain a "For Sale" sign. A robbery wouldn't explain the new lock. Liam was behind me now, his phone already pressed to his ear. I could hear his voice, tight with disbelief, as he spoke to someone. I didn't need to hear the other side of the conversation. I saw the color drain from his face, saw his eyes widen in a mixture of horror and dawning comprehension.
He lowered the phone slowly, his hand shaking as he looked at me, his expression a mask of agony and confusion. He had called his mother, and from the look on his face, she had just confirmed our worst nightmare. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, the cheerful suburban street blurring into a nonsensical watercolor. Liam stood frozen on the porch, his phone still clutched in his hand like a foreign object. The call had ended, but the silence that followed was more deafening than any conversation. His mother, Brenda, had confirmed it. She had sold our house. The words bounced around in my skull, each one a physical blow. Sold our house. While we were thousands of miles away, living in a honeymoon bubble, she had been here, systematically dismantling the life we had just begun to build. How? Why? The questions were a frantic, chattering swarm in my mind, but no answers would come. I felt a strange detachment, as if I were watching this happen to someone else in a movie. This couldn't be my life. I was Isabella, 28, a woman who had just married the love of her life in a beautiful ceremony, who had a perfect honeymoon and a perfect home waiting for her. This level of betrayal was something that happened in dramatic television shows, not in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood in the suburbs. A car pulled up to the curb, a sleek, expensive sedan that was painfully familiar. Brenda stepped out, not with the look of a woman who had been caught in a monumental error, but with the air of someone arriving for a scheduled appointment. She was impeccably dressed, her posture rigid with self-importance. She didn't rush towards us, her expression unreadable as she walked up the path, her heels clicking a cold, steady rhythm on the stones. She looked from my tear-streaked face to Liam's devastated one, and a flicker of something, impatience perhaps, crossed her features before being replaced by a mask of serene justification. She held up a leather portfolio, opening it to reveal a sheaf of papers. She tapped a single document with a manicured fingernail. It was a power of attorney. She explained, in a tone that was infuriatingly calm and matter-of-fact, that Liam had signed it months ago, in the midst of the stressful wedding planning. She claimed he had been overwhelmed, that she had suggested it as a way for her to help manage some of his affairs while he was focused on the marriage. She had used that document, she stated, to act in his best interest. My stomach churned. The best interest? She had emptied our home of every single possession we owned, which she had apparently moved into a storage unit across town, a gesture she presented as a generous favor. She had then sold the house, which, as she reminded us, was still in Liam's name alone, before we could officially add mine after the honeymoon. The proceeds from the sale, she informed us, were safe with her, invested in a portfolio she had deemed more secure than a depreciating asset and a burdensome mortgage. She spoke of her actions not as a betrayal, but as a rescue mission. She was saving her son from a rash decision, from a house she believed was too expensive, from a life with a woman she clearly didn't trust. The venom in her gaze when she looked at me was unmistakable, hidden just beneath the thin veneer of maternal concern. Liam was crumbling beside me.
The man who had been so strong, so confident on our honeymoon, now looked like a lost little boy. He stared at his mother, his mouth opening and closing, the words failing him. He had no memory of signing such a document, or if he had, he certainly didn't understand the immense power he was handing over. He looked at me, his eyes filled with an apology so profound it broke my heart all over again. He had been played, and I had been collateral damage. As Brenda stood there, the architect of our ruin, so proud of her deception, I felt the last threads of my composure snap. This wasn't just about a house anymore. This was about a violation so deep, so complete, it felt like she had reached into our chests and torn out our future. The first night was a blur of sterile, impersonal space. We checked into a generic chain hotel near the highway, the kind of place with fluorescent lighting and a faint smell of disinfectant that clung to everything. The room was a stark contrast to the overwater bungalow we had just left, a cruel and immediate descent from paradise to purgatory. Lying on the stiff, starchy sheets, I stared at the ceiling, the events of the day replaying in a relentless, torturous loop. The for sale sign, the empty rooms, Brenda's smug, unapologetic face. Beside me, Liam was a statue of misery, his back turned to me, the space between us a chasm of unspoken words and fractured trust. The silence was heavy, filled with everything we weren't saying. I was angry, a white-hot, simmering rage directed at both of them. At Brenda for her audacity and cruelty, and at Liam for his naivety. How could he have signed something so important without reading it? How could he not have seen the monster his mother was? But beneath the anger was a profound, aching sadness for him. He had been betrayed by the one person who was supposed to be his unwavering supporter. The foundation of his world had been blown to bits, and he was left standing in the rubble. The next morning, fueled by stale coffee and a desperate need for action, we began the process of fighting back. Our first call was to a lawyer recommended by a friend. We sat in a sterile conference room, the three of us huddled together, and laid out the insane, unbelievable story. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Miss Albright, listened intently, her expression shifting from disbelief to a focused, determined fury. She explained that while a power of attorney was a powerful legal tool, it wasn't a blank check. Its use had to be demonstrably in the best interest of the principal, and selling a primary residence without explicit informed consent was a massive legal gray area, one that leaned heavily toward fraud. The battle lines were drawn. It wasn't just us against Brenda anymore. It was a legal war. The following weeks were a masterclass in emotional torment. We lived out of suitcases, moving from the hotel to a short-term rental apartment that felt like a cage. Every day was a new form of hell. There were phone calls with banks, with the real estate agent who had handled the sale, with the title company. Each conversation was a fresh reminder of our violation. The worst part was the family implosion. The news spread through Liam's extended family like a poison. Phone calls and text messages lit up his phone. Some relatives were horrified, offering their support, but others, a contingent loyal to Brenda, circled the wagons. We heard whispers that we were ungrateful, that Brenda was just trying to protect her son, that I was a gold digger who had driven Liam to make poor financial choices. A family dinner, orchestrated by a well-meaning aunt, turned into an ambush. We walked into a room filled with people who looked at us with a mixture of pity and accusation. Brenda was there, playing the part of the wounded, misunderstood mother to perfection. She dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, claiming she only ever wanted what was best for her baby boy. The atmosphere was thick with tension, with unspoken loyalties and long-held family dynamics. Liam was caught in the middle, torn between his wife and the family who had raised him. The stress was etched onto his face, in the new lines around his eyes and the constant weary slump of his shoulders. Our marriage, just weeks old, was being tested in a way most couples never experience in a lifetime. We were supposed to be a team, but sometimes, in the dead of night in that sterile apartment, I would look at him and feel a vast, terrifying distance between us. We were united in our crisis, but the trauma was pulling us in opposite directions, isolating us in our own private hells. Just when I thought the weight of it all would crush us, Miss Albright's name lit up my phone. Her voice was tight with controlled excitement. She had been digging into the specifics of the power of attorney, the document that had started this entire nightmare. And she had found something. A detail, a single clause that she believed was the crack in Brenda's seemingly impenetrable defense. A crack that could shatter the whole thing to pieces. Miss Albright's words were a lifeline thrown into the turbulent sea of our despair. The detail she had found was a technicality, but it was a massive one. The power of attorney Brenda had wielded like a weapon was not a general, all-encompassing document. It was a specific, limited one, meant to be activated only in the event of a medical emergency where Liam was incapacitated and unable to make his own decisions. It was designed to allow his mother to, for example, consent to a surgery if he was unconscious in a hospital. It was never, ever intended to grant her the authority to liquidate his major assets. The signature was Liam's, but the context of its signing was everything. He had been tricked, manipulated into signing a document under the guise of just in case something happens wedding planning stress. Brenda had taken that inch of trust and stretched it into a mile of betrayal. Armed with this information, our strategy shifted. We were no longer just trying to undo a sale. We were building a case for deliberate, premeditated fraud. Miss Albright scheduled a meeting, a confrontation in the neutral territory of her office. She advised us to say as little as possible, to let the evidence speak for itself. The day of the meeting, I felt a cold knot of dread in my stomach. Liam, however, was different. The discovery of the claws had ignited a spark in him. For the first time since this began, I saw a flicker the man I had married. His back was straighter, his jaw set with a new, grim determination. He was no longer a victim, he was a man preparing for battle. Brenda arrived, exuding her usual air of unassailable confidence. She swept into the office, dressed in a tailored pantsuit as if she were there to close a business deal, not to answer for her crimes. She sat down, placing her expensive leather bag on the table beside her, and offered Miss Albright a patronizing smile. Our lawyer didn't return the smile. Instead, she slid a copy of the power of attorney across the table, along with a highlighted copy of the state statutes governing its use. She calmly, methodically, and without a hint of emotion, laid out the case. She explained how the document's limitations were explicit, how its use for the sale of a primary residence was a flagrant abuse of power, and how her actions constituted a clear case of civil and potentially criminal fraud. As Miss Albright spoke, I watched Brenda's face. The first crack in her composure appeared when the lawyer mentioned the specific clause. A slight twitch of the eye, a tightening of the lips. By the time Miss Albright finished, the mask of maternal concern had completely fallen away, replaced by a raw, undisguised fury. The facade crumbled, and the true Brenda was revealed. She leaned forward, her voice a low, venomous hiss. She accused me of being a manipulative temptress, of turning her son against her. She claimed Liam was weak, easily led, and that she was simply trying to save him from a lifetime of being shackled to a money pit and a woman who was only after her family's wealth. Her words were ugly, hateful, and utterly devoid of any remorse. She wasn't sorry. She was furious that she had been caught. And in that moment, something in Liam finally broke. But this time, it wasn't in despair. It was in anger. Hearing his mother attack me, seeing her complete lack of remorse for the agony she had caused him, seemed to fuse the broken pieces of him back together in a new, stronger configuration. He looked at her, not with the eyes of a wounded son, but with the cold, clear gaze of a man who no longer recognized the person who had given birth to him. He saw her for what she was, a manipulative, narcissistic bully. He stood up, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. He didn't yell, he didn't cry. He simply looked at his mother and told her, in a voice as cold and hard as steel, that she was never to contact us again. He walked around the table, took my hand, and together we walked out of the office, leaving Brenda and her toxic legacy behind us. The air outside had never felt so fresh, so free. The legal battle was far from over, but the personal war, the one that had been raging inside Liam, was won. He was no longer just her son. He was my husband, and he was finally, completely on my side. The courtroom was a place of solemn, intimidating order. High ceilings, dark wood, and the quiet rustling sound of paperwork created an atmosphere thick with gravity. This was the arena where our fate would be decided. Brenda sat at the defendant's table, flanked by her own high-priced lawyer. She had chosen her wardrobe carefully, a soft lilac-colored dress and a simple string of pearls, an outfit designed to project an image of gentle, frail respectability. She looked every bit the concerned, misunderstood mother, a performance she had clearly been rehearsing. On our side of the aisle, Miss Albright was a portrait of calm confidence. The trial unfolded like a meticulously crafted drama. Our lawyer presented our case piece by piece, building an unshakable wall of evidence. She called the real estate agent to the stand, who admitted under questioning that Brenda had been the sole point of contact and had represented that she had full authority to act on Liam's behalf. She presented financial records showing the transfer of the house's sale proceeds into an account controlled solely by Brenda. She even called a neighbor who testified to seeing a moving truck at our house while we were away, and to having a strange conversation with Brenda, who had claimed we had decided to move unexpectedly. Each piece of testimony was another nail in the coffin of Brenda's defense. Then it was Brenda's turn to take the stand. She played her part to the hilt. She spoke softly, her voice occasionally cracking with manufactured emotion. She painted a picture of a devoted mother, terrified for her son's financial future. She claimed she had tried to talk to Liam, but that I had isolated him, that I was the one whispering in his ear, pressuring him into a house and a life he couldn't afford. She looked at the judge, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, and insisted that every action she took was out of love, a desperate attempt to save her son from a terrible mistake. It was a masterful performance, but it began to unravel under Ms. Albright's cross-examination. Our lawyer was relentless, her questions sharp and precise. She forced Brenda to admit that she had never discussed the sale with Liam directly. She made her acknowledge that she had moved our belongings without our knowledge or consent. And then Ms. Albright presented the final, devastating piece of evidence, the limited power of attorney with its specific, highlighted clause. She asked Brenda point blank if she understood that the document she had used gave her no legal authority to sell real estate. Brenda's composure finally shattered. She deflected, she blustered, she claimed the clause was just legal jargon, but the damage was done. The judge, a woman with a sharp, no-nonsense demeanor, looked at her with undisguised disapproval. The climax of the trial came when Liam took the stand. He was calm, composed, and his quiet honesty was more powerful than any of Brenda's theatrics. He spoke of the stress of the wedding planning, of how his mother had presented the document as a simple precaution. He spoke of his shock and devastation upon returning from his honeymoon to find his life gone. He looked directly at his mother when he spoke, his voice filled not with anger, but with a profound sense of betrayal. He told the court that the person who sat before him was not the mother he thought he knew. After deliberating for what felt like an eternity, the judge returned. The verdict was swift and absolute. She ruled that the sale of the house was fraudulent and therefore null and void. She ordered Brenda to return every cent of the proceeds, plus pay for all of our legal fees and court costs. But she didn't stop there. She stated that the evidence strongly suggested criminal activity and that she would be referring the case to the district attorney's office for potential prosecution. As the judge's words echoed in the silent courtroom, a bailiff approached Brenda's table. Her face, once a mask of false piety, was now a canvas of pure, unadulterated shock and rage. As the bailiff escorted her from the room, she turned, her eyes locking onto mine. There was no performance left, no tears, no pretense. There was only a raw, burning hatred that chilled me to the bone. The legal battle was over. We had won. But as I looked into her eyes, I knew that this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a new, more dangerous kind of war. The aftermath of the trial was a strange, quiet limbo. The legal victory was ours, but the emotional landscape was still a minefield. The first step was reclaiming our home. The court order to reverse the sale was a powerful document, but the process of unwinding a real estate transaction was slow and bureaucratic. For weeks, the house remained in a state of legal purgatory. When we finally got the call that the reversal was complete and the keys were legally ours again, it felt surreal. Walking up that familiar stone path, this time with a key that we knew would work, was one of the most emotional moments of my life. The house was still empty, still echoing with the ghosts of our stolen belongings. The pale blue walls seemed to mock us, but it was ours. Standing in the middle of the living room with the afternoon light streaming through the windows, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't realized I'd been missing. It was a blank slate, A chance to start over, not just with furniture, but with everything. The financial restitution was a more complicated battle. Brenda, facing potential criminal charges, had become combative. She had transferred the money from the house sale into various investments, many of which were shady or difficult to liquidate quickly. It took months of legal maneuvering, with Miss Albright fighting to enforce the court's judgment, but slowly, agonizingly, the money began to trickle back into our account. It was a constant, painful reminder of the violation, but with each transfer, we felt a small piece of our future being returned to us. The most significant change, however, was in our family dynamic. The criminal referral from the judge was not an empty threat. The district attorney's office took the case, and Brenda was formally charged with felony fraud and theft. The possibility of prison time was very real. This reality splintered what was left of Liam's family. The relatives who had defended her were now silent, their loyalty shaken by the severity of the criminal charges. Liam made the difficult but necessary decision to sever all ties. He blocked her number, her email, and refused any attempts at contact made through intermediaries. It was an amputation, a painful but life-saving procedure to remove the cancer that was destroying his life. We threw ourselves into rebuilding. We went to marriage counseling, not because our relationship was broken, but to process the shared trauma we had endured. It gave us tools to communicate, to navigate the triggers and the lingering anger that sometimes surfaced. We made a pact to turn the empty house into a home, together. We went furniture shopping, not out of necessity, but as an act of creation. Each piece we chose was a symbol of our resilience. A new sofa for long conversations, a sturdy dining table for future family gatherings, our chosen family, a soft rug for our feet to touch in the morning. We painted the walls a new color, a warm, welcoming beige that was ours and ours alone. One evening, months later, I was standing on the front porch watching the sunset. The house was finally starting to feel like a home again, filled with our things, our laughter, our life. Liam came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder. We stood there in comfortable silence, watching the sky paint itself in brilliant shades of orange and purple. The scars from the ordeal were still there, faint but permanent. They were a reminder of the nightmare we had survived. But as I stood there, in the arms of the man I loved, in the home we had fought so hard to reclaim, I knew we were stronger than before. The honeymoon was over, but the real marriage, the one forged in fire and betrayal, had just begun. And it was unbreakable.